I'm Madeline.
Hi, I'm Sabrina.
And welcome to Furends. Sabrina's going to eat a donut today while I read my book.
Yes. Because why not?
We don't want you to be hangry now. No hanger.
No, not a long day.
And we're doing 2 episodes back to back, so you're like, I need my stamina, I need some energy for this.
Need some sugar.
Alright, so, just to reiterate, this is in no way an audiobook. This is me reading to my friend. And then we discuss it. We both watched Vampire Diaries on the
CW.
However, the book is very different. So, without further ado,
Let's go.
Chapter 4. By the time Elena reached her locker, the numbness had worn off, and the lump in her throat was trying to dissolve into tears. But she wouldn't cry at school, she told herself. She wouldn't. After closing her locker, she made for the main exit. For the second day in a row, she was coming home from school right after the last bell, and alone. Aunt Judith wouldn't be able to cope. But when Elena reached her house, Aunt Judith's car was not in the driveway. She and Margaret must have gone out to the market. The house was still and peaceful as Elena let herself in. She was glad for the stillness, and she wanted to be alone right now. But on the other hand, she didn't exactly know what to do with herself. Now that she could cry, she found that the tears wouldn't come. She let her backpack sag onto the floor in the front hall and walked slowly into the living room. It was a handsome, impressive room, and the only part of the house besides Elena's bedroom that belonged to the original structure. The first house had been built during 1861 and had been almost completely burned in the Civil War. All that could be saved from the room with the elaborate fireplace framed by scrolling molding and the big bedroom above. Elena's great-grandfather had built a new house, and the Gilberts had lived in it ever since. Elena turned to look at one of the ceiling-to-floor windows. The glass was so old that it was thick and wavy. Did you know that glass is considered a liquid?
Because it's melted.
Yeah, like, if it sits for a long time, it'll start to get streaks because it'll be, like, melting.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it's at least from what my parents have told me. I don't know if it's completely true because, I never looked it up. But, it's a liquid because it melts.
I did not know it was considered liquid, but it makes sense because it is melted down.
Yeah, but also if you go to, like, old ghost towns and stuff, you'll see, like drip marks on it because it'll start to, like, melt into a new shape.
That makes sense.
Glass was so old that it was thick and wavy, and everything outside was distorted, looking slightly tipsy. She remembered the first time her father had showed her the wavery old glass when she had been younger than Margaret was now. The fullness in her throat was back, but still no tears would come. Everything inside her was contradictory. She didn't want company, and yet she was achingly lonely. She did want to think, but now that she was trying to, her thoughts eluded her like mice running from a white owl. White owl, hunting bird, flesh eater, crow. She thought, biggest crow I've ever seen, Matt had said. Her eyes stung again. Poor Matt, she was hurting him, but he'd been so nice about it. He'd even been nice to Stefan. Her heart thudded once hard, squeezing 2 more tears out of her eyes. There she was crying at last. She was crying with anger and humiliation and frustration and what else? What had she really lost today? And what did she really feel for this stranger, this Stefan Salvatore? He was a challenge, yes, but what made him different? Interesting. Stefan was exotic, exciting. Funny that the reading too fast makes my tongue need to do some push-ups or something, or makes my tongue feel like it's been doing push-ups or something. Funny, that was what guys had sometimes told Elena she was. And later, she heard from them or from their friends or sisters how nervous they were about going out with her. Now her palms were sweaty and their stomachs were full of butterflies. She'd always found such stories amusing. No boy she'd ever met in her life had made her nervous. But when she spoke to Stefan today, her pulse had been racing and her knees had been weak. Her palms had been wet, and there had been butterflies in her stomach. There had been bats. She was interested in the guy because he made her nervous. Not a very good reason. Elena had told herself, in fact, a very bad reason. But there was also that mouth, that sculpted mouth that made her knees weak, with something utterly different than nervous. And that night black hair, her fingers itched to weave themselves through its softness. That flat body, those long legs, and that voice. It was his voice that had decided her yesterday, making her absolutely determined to have him. His voice had been cool and disdainful when talking to Mr. Tanner, but strangely compelling for all of that. She wondered if that could turn night dark as well, and how it would sound saying her name, whispering her name. Elena! Elena jumped, her reverie shattered. But it wasn't Stefan Salvatore calling her, it was Aunt Judith rattling the front door open. Elena! Elena! And that was Margaret, her voice shrill and piping. Are you home? Misery welled up in Elena again, and she glanced around the kitchen. She couldn't mind her aunt's worried questions or Margaret's innocent cheerfulness right now, not with her eyelashes wet and her new tears threatening any minute. She made a lightning decision and quietly slipped out the back door as the front door banged shut. Once off the back porch and into the yard, she hesitated. She didn't want to run anywhere to anyone she knew, but where could she go alone? The answer came instantly. Of course, she'd go see Mom and Dad. It was a fairly long walk, almost to the edge of town, but over the last 3 years it had become familiar to Elena. She crossed over Wickery Bridge and climbed up the hill. Yeah?
That's what he's waiting for.
Past the ruined church and down the little valley below. Chewie, leave it.
Leave it.
Drop.
Thank you.
Do you want to fix that? This part of the cemetery was well kept. It was an old section that was allowed to run slightly wild. Here the grass was neatly trimmed and bouquets of flowers. Lay down. Bouquets of flowers made splashes of bright color. Elena sat down by a big marble headstone with Gilbert carved on the front. Hi, Mom and Dad, she whispered. She leaned over to place purple impendium blossoms she had picked along the way from the front of the marker. She curled her legs under her as she just sat. She'd come here often after the accident. Margaret had only been one at the time of the car crash. She didn't really remember them, but Elena did. Now she let her mind leaf back through the memories, and the lump in her throat swelled and the tears came easier. She missed them so much. Mother so young and useful, and Father with a smile and crinkled up eyes. She was lucky to have Aunt Judith, of course. It wasn't every aunt who quit her job to move back to a little town to take care of 2 orphan nieces. And Robert, Aunt Judith's fiancé, was more like a stepfather to Margaret than uncle-to-be by marriage. But Elena remembered her parents. Sometimes right after the funeral, she would come out here to rage at them, angry with them for being so stupid to get themselves killed. That was when she had known Aunt Judith very well. She hadn't known Aunt Judith very well, and she felt there was nowhere on earth she belonged anywhere. Where did she belong now, she wondered. The easy question was here, in Bell's Church, where she'd lived all her life. But lately, the easy answer seemed wrong. Lately, she felt as if there might be something out there for her, some place that would recognize her once and called home. She would recognize at once and called home. A shadow fell over her, and she looked up, startled. For an instant, the 2 figures standing over her were alien, vaguely familiar, vaguely menacing. She stared frozen. Elena, said the smaller figure, fussy hands on her hips. Sometimes I worry about you, I really do. Elena blinked, then laughed shortly. It was Bonnie and Meredith. What does a person have to do to get a little privacy around here? She said as she sat down. Tell us to go away, suggested Meredith. But Elena just shrugged. Meredith and Bonnie had often come here to find her in the months after the accident. Suddenly she felt glad about that and grateful for them both. If nowhere else, she belonged with friends who cared about her. She didn't mind that they knew that she had been crying, and she accepted the crumpled tissue Bonnie offered her and wiped her eyes. The 3 of them sat together in silence and wiped silence for a while, watching the wind ruffle the stand of oak trees at the edge of the cemetery. I'm so sorry about what happened, Bonnie said at last in a soft voice. It really was terrible. And your middle name is Tact, said Meredith. It couldn't have been that bad, Elena. You weren't there. Elena felt herself go hot all over again at the memory. It was terrible. But I don't care anymore, she said flatly and defiantly. I'm finished with him, and I don't want him anyway. Elena, I don't, Bonnie. He obviously thinks he's too good for Americans, so he can take his designer sunglasses and. There were snorts of laughter from the other girls. Elena wiped her nose and shook her head. So, she said to Bonnie, determinedly changing the subject, at least Tanner seemed to be in a good mood today. Bonnie looked martyred. Do you know that he made me sign up to be the very first to give my oral report? I don't care, though. I'm going to do mine on the Druids and... On the what? Druids. The weird old guys who built Stonehenge, did magic and stuff in ancient England. I'm descended from them, and that's why I'm psychic. Meredith snorted, but Elena frowned at the blade of grass she'd been twirling between her fingers. Bonnie, did you see something yesterday in my palm? She asked abruptly. Bonnie hesitated. I don't know, she said at last. I thought I did then, but sometimes my imagination runs away with me. She knew you were here, said Meredith unexpectedly. I thought of looking for you at the coffee shop, but Bonnie said she's at the cemetery. Did I? Bonnie looked faintly surprised and impressed. Well, there you see, my grandmother in Edinburgh has the second sight, and so do I. It sometimes skips a generation. And you're descended from Druids, Meredith said solemnly. Well, it's true. In Scotland, they kept up the old traditions. You wouldn't believe some of the things my grandmother does.
Scotland. I did mention Scotland. It was
Yeah.
for Stefan, but still.
Well, she also has that, like, bright red hair, like, you know, Merida from Brave.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of how I imagined her, like,
Yeah.
big, frizzy, red hair, like, you know.
I want to go to Scotland so bad.
That would be so
I
fun.
love Scotland. I love everything about Scotland. Anyways, it just
Another
reminded
fun
me.
trip. We'll
Yes.
have to book it.
Yes.
She has a way of finding out who you're going to marry and when you're going to die. She told me I'm going to die early. Bonnie! She did. I'm going to be young and beautiful in my coffin. Don't you think that's romantic? No, I don't. I think it's disgusting, said Elena. The shadows were getting longer and the wind had chilled to it now. So who are you going to marry, Bonnie? Meredith said deftly. I don't know. My mother told me the ritual for finding out, but I never tried it, of course. Bonnie struck a sophisticated pose. He has to be outrageously rich and totally gorgeous, like our mysterious dark stranger, for example, particularly if nobody else wants him. She cast a wicked glance at Elena. Elena refused the bait. What about Tyler Smallwood? She murmured innocently. His father's certainly rich enough, and he's not bad looking, agreed Meredith solemnly. That is, of course, if you're an animal lover, all those big white teeth. The girls looked at each other and then simultaneously burst into laughter. Bonnie threw a handful of grass at Meredith, who brushed it off and threw a dandelion back at her. Somewhere in the middle of it, Elena realized that she was going to be all right. She was herself again, not lost. Not a stranger, but Elena Gilbert, the queen of Robert E. Lee. She pulled the apricot ribbon out of her hair and shook her hair free around her face. I've decided what to do my oral report on, she said, watching narrow eyes as Bonnie's finger combed through the grass out of her curls. What? Said Meredith. Elena tilted her chin up to gaze at the red and purple sky above the hill. She took a thoughtful breath and let the suspense build for a moment. Then she said coolly, the Italian Renaissance. Bonnie and Meredith stared at her and then looked at each other and burst into whoops of laughter again. Aha, said Meredith when they recovered. So the tiger returneth. Elena gave her a feral grin. Her shaken confidence had returned to her, and though she didn't understand it herself, she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let Stefan Salvatore get away alive. All right, she said briskly. Now listen, you two. Nobody else can know about this, or I'll be laughing stock at the school. And Caroline would just love any excuse to make me look ridiculous. But I do still want him, and I'm going to have him. I don't know how yet, but I am. Until I come up with a plan, though, we're going to give him the cold shoulder. Oh, we are. Yes, we are. You can't have him, Bonnie. He's mine. And I have to be able to trust you completely. Wait a minute, said Meredith, a glint in her eye. She unclasped the pin from her blouse, then holding it up in her thumb, made a quick jab. Bonnie, give me your hand. Why? Said Bonnie, eyeing the pin suspiciously. Because I want to marry you. Why do you think, idiot? But, oh, all right. Ow! Now you, Elena. Meredith pricked Elena's thumb efficiently and then grabbed it to get a drop of blood. Now, she continued, looking at each other, two dark, sparkling eyes. We press our thumbs together and swear, especially you, Bonnie, swear to keep this a secret. And whatever you do, and do whatever Elena asks in relation to Stefan. Look, swearing with blood is dangerous, Bonnie protested seriously. It means you have to stick to your oath no matter what happens, no matter what, Meredith. I know, said Meredith grimly. That's why I'm telling you to do it. I remember what happened with Michael Martin. Bonnie made a face. That was years ago, and we broke up right away. And, oh, all right, I'll swear. Closing her eyes, she said, I swear to keep this a secret and to do anything Elena asks about Stefan. Meredith repeated the oath, and Elena, staring at the pale shadows of their thumbs joined together in the gathering dusk, took a deep breath and said softly, And I swear not to rest until he belongs to me. A gust of cold wind blew through the cemetery, fanning the girl's hair out and sending dry leaves fluttering on the ground. Bonnie gasped and pulled back, and they all looked around, then giggled nervously. It's dark, said Elena, surprised. We better get started home, Meredith said, refastening her pin as she stood up. Bonnie stood up too, putting the tip of her thumb into her mouth. Goodbye, said Elena softly, facing the headstone. The purple blossom was a blur on the ground. She picked up the apricot ribbon that lay next to it, turned and nodded to Bonnie and Meredith. Let's go. Silently, they headed up the hill towards the ruined church. The oath sworn in blood had been given them all a solemn feeling, and they passed the ruined church. Bonnie shivered. With the sun down, the temperature had dropped abruptly, and the wind was rising. Each gust sent whispers through the grass and made the ancient oak trees rattle their dangling leaves. I'm freezing, Elena said, pausing for a moment by the black hole that had once been the church door, and looking down at the landscape below. The moon had not risen yet, and she couldn't make out the old graveyard and Wickery Bridge beyond it. The old graveyard dated from the Civil War days, and many of the headstones bore the names of soldiers. It had a wild look to it. Brambles and tall weeds grew on graves, and ivy vines swarmed over crumbling granite. Elena had never liked it. It looks different, doesn't it? In the dark, I mean, she said unsteadily. She didn't know how to say that she really meant it, that not from a pace from the living. We could go the long way, said Meredith, but that would mean another 20 minutes of walking. I don't mind going this way, said Bonnie, swallowing hard. I always said I wanted to be buried down here in the old one. Will you stop talking about being buried? Elena snapped. She started down the hill, but the farther down the narrow path she got, the more uncomfortable she felt. She slowed until Bonnie and Meredith caught up with her. As they neared the first headstone, her heart began beating fast. She tried to ignore it, but her whole skin was tingling with the awareness, and the fine hairs on her arms were standing up. Between the gusts of wind, every sound seemed horribly
magnified.
Thank you. The crunching of their feet on the leaf-strewn path was deafening. The ruined church was a black silhouette beyond them now. The narrow path led between the lichen-encrusted headstones, many of which stood taller than Meredith, big enough for something to hide behind, thought Elena uneasily. Some of the tombstones themselves were unnerving, like the one with a cherub that looked like a real baby, except its head had fallen off and had been carefully placed back on the body. The wide granite eyes of the head were blank. Elena couldn't look away from it, and her heart began to pound. Why are you stopping? Said Meredith. I'm sorry, she whispered, but then she forced herself to turn. She immediately stiffened. Bonnie, she said. Bonnie, what's wrong? Bonnie was staring straight into the graveyard, her lips parted, her eyes wide and blank as the stone cherubs. Fear washed through Elena's stomach. Bonnie, stop it! Stop it! It's not funny! Bonnie made no reply. Bonnie, said Meredith. She and Elena looked at each other, and suddenly Elena knew she had to get away. She whirled to start down the path, but a strange voice spoke behind her, and she jerked around. Elena, the voice said. It wasn't Bonnie's voice, but it came from Bonnie's mouth. Pale in the darkness, Bonnie was still staring out into the graveyard. There was no expression on her face at all. Elena, the voice said again, and added as Bonnie's head turned towards her, there's something waiting out there for you. Elena never knew quite what happened in the next few minutes. Something seemed to move out among the dark humped shapes of headstones, shifting and rising between them. Elena screamed and Meredith cried out, and they were both running, and Bonnie was running with them, screaming too. Elena pounded down the narrow path, stumbling on rocks and clumps of grass root. Bonnie was sobbing for breath behind her, and Meredith, calm and cynical. Meredith was panting wildly. There was a sudden thrashing and a shriek in an oak tree above them, and Elena found that she could run faster. "There's something behind us," cried Bonnie shrilly. "Oh, God, what's happening?" "Get to the bridge," said Elena through fire in her lungs. She didn't know why, but she felt that they had to make it there. "Don't stop, Bonnie. Don't look behind you." She grabbed the other girl's sleeve and pulled her around. "I can't make it," Bonnie sobbed, clutching her side, her face paling. "Yes, you can," snarled Elena, grabbing Bonnie's sleeve again and forcing her to keep moving. "Come on, come on!" She saw a silver gleam of water before them, and there was the clearing between the oak trees and the bridge just beyond. Elena's legs were wobbling, and her breath was whistling in her throat, but she wouldn't let herself lag behind. Now she could see the wooden planks of the footbridge. The bridge was 20 feet away from them, 10 feet away, 5. "We made it," panted Meredith's feet thundering on the wood. "Don't stop. Get to the other side." The bridge creaked as they ran, staggering across it, their steps echoing across the water. Then she jumped onto the packed dirt on the far shore. Elena let go of Bonnie's sleeve at last and allowed her legs to stumble to a halt. Meredith was bent over, hands on thighs, deep breathing. Bonnie was crying. "What was that? Oh, what was that?" she said. "Is it still coming?" "I thought you were the expert," Meredith said unsteadily. "For heaven's sake, Elena, let's get out of here." "No, it's all right now," Elena whispered. There were tears in her own eyes, and she was shaking all over, but the hot breath on the back of her neck was gone. The river stretched between her and it, the waters a dark tumult. "You can't follow us here," she said. Meredith stared at her and the other shore, and the cluttered oak trees, then at Bonnie. She wet her lips and laughed shortly. "Sure, it can follow us, but let's go home anyway, all right? Unless you feel like spending the night here." Some unnameable feeling shuddered through Elena. "Not tonight, thanks," she said. She put an arm around Bonnie, who was sniffling. "It's okay, Bonnie. We're safe now. Come on." Meredith was looking across the river again. "I don't see a thing back there," she said, her voice calmer. "Maybe there wasn't anything behind us at all. Maybe we're just panicked and scared ourselves. With a little help from a druid priestess here." Elena said nothing as they started walking, keeping very close together on the dirt path, but she wondered very much. That is the end
Yes.
of chapter 5.
And chapter 4.
Alright, so
Interesting.
something was following them, and
Something.
she did see, what did she see in the tree? Do you remember?
No.
She saw Raven.
The raven.
The crow raven thing.
Crow.
Yeah. Any
That's-
theories?
Theories. I feel that Bonnie's witchy powers are going to get stronger and they're going to become more frequent.
Okay.
And it's going to be like an opening for Meredith and Elena's like world because I don't think that they. I think that they toyed with like, oh yeah, Bonnie, yeah, sure, but I think that this is going to start opening up the door. Like there is actually like
Something out there.
the other side of a world, and there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think they're already starting to feel that way just because of what happened in the graveyard. Like,
Yeah.
Bonnie literally turned around and started, like,
possessed.
being possessed, like, oh! And so, like, Elena's like, GTFO.
Exactly. And like I said, I think that this is the start of, like, Bonnie's powers, or witchiness, communication, whatever you want to call it, starting to get stronger and more frequent, and it's going to open up the minds of Elena and Meredith. And I think someone, either it's the Raven or one of the vampires, is stalking Elena.
Mm-hmm.
And
just has control over the raven or something.
Maybe has control over the raven, or
Like
is
some kind of
using-
Maleficent thing, like
kind of thing, where they're like sending it off to go find her and like taunt her a little bit to see like what they can get out of her. Maybe it's like Damon who like knows that Elena's there and he thinks it's Catherine,
maybe.
and he's like
That's my
testing the waters to make sure it's not Catherine. I don't know. That's something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see here. What do you think that Bonnie was actually like able to
Yes.
tell? Okay.
I do.
Okay.
I don't think that a teenager would, at least Bonnie, she doesn't seem like the type of teenager that would make up something like that. I feel like that part of a world is
Because
very
we
special to
do
her.
have this other character, Meredith, and she said that Meredith was going to die young. Do you think that that prediction is going to be true, or if she was just pulling that out of her butt?
I think it's true.
So maybe she'll die in this book or in the next one.
If not this one, definitely the next one.
Yeah.
I don't think she's going to live very
Very
long in this story.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Especially because we haven't heard of her in Vampire Diaries at all.
Yeah, we haven't. So I was just thinking, like, who is this character? Like, we don't remember Meredith. So I do think she's going to die fairly soon.
I was thinking like maybe she was like Vicky. You know what I mean?
Oh, possibly.
Yeah, like
Possibly
the Vicky equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
But
Even Vicky died soon.
yeah,
into
so that's
this
kind of
show.
what I was thinking. But I haven't read this book in a very long time. It was the last time I read this was in high school, so it's like 10 years ago. So I'm kind of reliving it. I do remember bits and pieces, but definitely relearning some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's nice.
Interesting. I like it so far.
I'm glad.
It does seem different from the TV show.
Well, yeah. And from what I remember, it starts off similar to the TV show. Like, you know, she was in the graveyard and a crow came down, like, in the TV show. But, like, the main villain is different. And, like, there's other mythical creatures that do show up later on where it's, where they definitely were not in the TV show. And you're like, oh, that's the thing. Okay.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's not just witches and vampires. There are
Other
things,
creatures.
Other creatures. So do prepare
come.
for that. Other things to come.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Sounds
I just
good.
think it's very interesting that Elena's a blonde and they chose to have her be brunette in Vampire Diaries.
I prefer her brunette. Honestly.
I think that's just because that's what we're used to.
I don't know.
And also, to be fair, we're both brunettes, so I think we identify with that a little bit more. You know what
Maybe there's some like subconscious bias.
I mean? Yeah.
in it.
Like you're like, oh, yeah. I don't know if you can hear that, but my husband is playing with lightsabers in the other room. It's a little distracting.
He builds them, right?
Yeah, he builds. Well, he installs them. So like certain companies will like people will send him like empty hilts of like more like realistic looking ones and the ones at like Disneyland and stuff, and then he'll put the electronics in it.
Gotcha.
But yeah, he's just testing one out right now. It's really loud.
Really loud. But that's okay.
Apparently, it's got a really good speaker. All right. Anything else? And
no, I'm just enjoying it so far.
yeah,
I like it. I like how it's panning out. I also don't remember a lot of the TV show as well, like all these little details. I also don't remember all that. So it's good. I like it. It's a good story. Keeps me interested.
We'll have to get some quinces.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right, so
Let us know below if we
Let us
are.
know below. We'll probably look that up before we test out a quince.
Yeah, or
if you can actually eat it, it sounds like something you could eat, though, right?
it does. It
Like
seems
you
like
don't say like you say apple tree, not or like a cherry tree or like a pear tree. So I'm assuming if it says quince tree, you can eat a quince.
You would assume, yes. We'll see. We'll find out.
We'll
Maybe
find out.
We'll do a video on it.
We'll do a video of us trying it.
A quince.
A reaction video to
Yeah.
trying it. You know, like instead of.
I wonder how you can't eat it.
I don't know. We'll have to look at a YouTube video on how to eat it.
We will and recreate it.
And recreate it and be like, this is our reaction to eating this.
Yes, we'll do that.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Well,
Alrighty.
we will see you guys
Next week?
on Monday. Yeah, next week.
Yeah, next week. Yeah.
All right.